Hi, and welcome to the OT is In, the podcast where we merge the worlds of education and occupational therapy to empower families like yours. I'm Sarah Collins, your host, an occupational therapist and a homeschooling parent. I've experienced occupational therapy by supporting families for over 15 years, but also through seeking out support of my own children, so I'm right here in the trenches with you. Though there is not one way to educate your child, there is a lot to consider when individualizing an education. And the goal of this podcast is to explain some of the why behind what an occupational therapist is thinking so you can apply it to your own family. Especially with my three favorite topics: executive functioning, handwriting, and sensory processing. Each episode will be packed with practical tips, expert interviews, and real-life stories aimed at helping you to create a supportive learning environment for your child. So, grab your headphones and get ready to dive in of the collision of education and occupational therapy. I'm Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT, and I'm thrilled to have you with me on this journey of discovery. Hey, and welcome back to the OT is In. I'm Sarah Collins, occupational therapist, homeschool mom, and your host here at the OT is In, where we're going to talk about real life, real kids, and practical ways to support development within your homeschool day. Before we jump in, I want to thank Lovevery for being the title sponsor of today's episode. One of the things I appreciate most about Lovevery is how intentionally their toys and activities support development through everyday play. So much of what we're talking about today, communication, language, learning, interaction, and connection, actually begins long before academics. It begins in play and in conversation, in shared experiences, and in the little moments that help children to build understanding of the world around them. Today's episode is such an important one because we are diving into speech and language development with my good friend Amanda Owens. We're talking about what the terms actually mean, when parents might want to seek additional support, and how speech and language connect to academics like reading, writing, comprehension, and even math. I think many homeschool parents hear speech therapy and they immediately think about articulation, maybe trouble with the R sounds like we had in my own home, or difficulty pronouncing certain words. But speech and language are so much broader than that. And in today's conversation, we're really going to connect the dots between communication, learning, and how our children process and express information. So whether you've had questions about your child's reading progress, comprehension, communication, or you've just wondered what speech-language pathologists actually do, I think this episode is going to give you a lot to think about in a really encouraging and very practical way. So, let's jump in. One of the things I hear most often from homeschool parents is this quiet worry. My child is trying so hard, so why does learning still feel like such a struggle? I want to share a quick story from a mom in Virginia who found a solution by working with Learning RX, because I think a lot of you will recognize yourselves in it. She had two daughters, both struggling in different ways. When her older daughter had finished a full brain training program, what stood out wasn't just better reading, spelling, and math, though those did improve too, but the emotional shift. Her frustration dropped, she stopped dreading schoolwork, and for the first time she could work independently for longer stretches without melting down. Then her younger daughter started training, and within just a short time, this mom saw improvements in reading, attention, and memory. But my favorite part, she shared that her daughter was suddenly reading chapter books on her own with no prompting or nagging. I've heard so many amazing testimonies like this from Learning RX clients because this is what they do. They don't teach content, they strengthen the underlying cognitive skills like attention, working memory, and processing speed that make learning feel easier and more rewarding in the first place. Every client is different, and your child may or may not achieve the same results as this family. But if you're homeschooling a child who's bright but distracted, capable but frustrated, or exhausted by daily learning battles, Learning RX might be worth exploring. Their research backed programs help the brain get stronger so that learning doesn't feel like such a fight anymore for kids or parents. So head to learningrx.com/homeschoolot to get special discounted pricing on the cognitive skills assessment and sign up to get additional information and free resources from the Learning RX homeschool support team. Hey, and welcome back to the OT is in. My name is Sarah Collins, and today I have the pleasure of bringing you my very good friend, Amanda Owens. There are not that many people in our homeschool space that are both, therapists working with homeschoolers and homeschoolers themselves. And Amanda even takes it one step back, and she was homeschooled. So it is such a pleasure to be with her again and then to share her with you. So, Amanda, I know I gave a little brief synopsis of who you are, but there's way more to you. So, can you just start by interrupting? That is not the word. Can you just start by introducing yourself?
Yes, I certainly can. I'm so excited to be here, Sarah. This is just a blast for me because I knew that it was an excuse for us to get together and talk about things that really matter. And so I'm really looking forward to it. But my name is Amanda Owens. I am a speech language pathologist, but I was a homeschool grad. I had gone to regular schools. I graduated high school, though, as a homeschooler when my mom and my dad pulled me, handed me the credit card, and said, well, you're homeschooled now. Get yourself some curriculum. And I did just that. And I finished out my high school years from grade up, went to college, and then decided, wow, I probably need something productive to do with my life. I was looking on websites, found this crazy thing called speech language pathology. And I'm going to give you a spoiler alert to something I'm going to be talking about later. I had no idea what that
Yeah.
was or what that did or what it could do. It just happened to be next to something that I had been looking at. And I was reading it. I was like, oh my goodness, I think this would be so interesting and it could help people. I love helping people. So, long story short, I did a little bit of a visit to a top 25 program in my area, started taking prerequisite courses there, got accepted into the program and graduated 2 years later. And I have been a speech language pathologist for 14 years.
Boom, boom.
And I know I was telling my husband, I was like, I'm at the end of the curve because usually
Yeah.
SLPs, we move out of speech therapy after a certain point. So I'm definitely in the middle
Really?
of
That's
my
so
career.
interesting.
I know. I have this theory that they all go marry doctors and dentists and then work part-time or something. Anyways, beside the point, I get to speak and volunteer at my state's conference, the Indiana Association of Home Educators. I've spent a lot of time with them on their special learners team. And in general, I just go taking speech therapy knowledge to homeschoolers all across the world, actually, through all the different things that I offer. But I provide speech therapy besides helping my husband homeschool our 4 kids. Yeah, it's a
That's
lot of fun, but yeah, anything speech therapy, I get a little nerdy about it. It's true.
And that's part of why Amanda and I, we either Vox or back and forth or Marco Polo several times a month and just really go over all the things that we're thinking about, how we're serving the homeschool community, how we can better serve the homeschool
Mm.
community, and then also just our day-to-day life. And so it's just so wonderful to have her here. And one of the reasons I wanted Amanda to come is because you kind of alluded to it that a lot of people are like, what on earth is speech therapy? But I know that there's so many people that are like, you know what, my kiddo can't say his R's. This is me
Oh yeah,
included.
yeah.
Really struggled with his R's. We went into speech therapy. Now, granted, this was 2020 and everybody was masked. And so I was like, in session 2, this is unhelpful. Could not see what he was supposed to be doing. And we ended up, just moving on and working ourselves. And actually with a course that you sent me, which was
Yes, yeah.
fantastic. So once we got through all that, I was like, cool, well, that's all that speech would be, but it's not. So, can you just dive in a little bit more about, besides telling our kids how to say their R's and THs, what else does speech therapy do?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. And it's one that I surprise parents with all the time because so many times I'll be working with a child for speech sounds. So their S's, their THs, their K sounds, you name a sound. If a child is working on them, people usually think, oh, they need a speech therapist. But back in the day, speech therapy was one thing. And now a speech language pathologist has really become something entirely more inclusive. And we do a lot of what needs to be done from the neck up. And if you're just listening to this, you won't see this, but I do talk with my hands, and I'm most definitely like neck up. That's speech therapy. So we do things with feeding and swallowing. So I worked a lot with infants who had G tubes
Mhm.
and who had to have syringe feeds, and were learning how to eat, chew and swallow safely, or latch with mama safely and productively. I've worked actually at the end of life with swallowing as well. And this goes from picky eating to kids who are choking risks and have to eat different foods in order to be safe. But then if I move on down, from the neck, if I'm moving on up, we not only work on, the speech sounds, but we also work on the quality of the voice. So I have some friends from my cohort who work with professional voice users. I have a few kids that
Interesting.
work, yes, who work with me, and they are doing voiceover work. And we work on clearing the space for good vocal productions to happen, for good vocal health. So the voice box and all the associated areas. I work with kids on resonance. Sometimes I'll have a kid who kind of
Mhm.
sounds like this, and I'll work on them so that they don't sound like that anymore. I work with kids with cleft palates. I work with kids with hearing impairments to be able to communicate effectively, if they want to be verbal or oral, in their speech. I work with them, to help the audiologist train their cochlear implant. Now that is an area that I am much weaker in, and I
Okay.
usually refer those families out, but that's something that speech language pathologists do. But where I get super excited is when we move even farther up and we're into the brain, and we're working with things like stuttering and cluttering, those different types of rhythm disorders. And there's, the differences in how a child is able to put out their speech, even if they know exactly what they want to say. And even more so as we continue to go up into the brain and we're working on reading. We're working on how the brain perceives sounds, phonological and phonemic awareness. We're working on attention, executive functioning, the child's ability to learn language for the first time, as well as for their ability to read and write and comprehend beautifully. I work with kids with auditory processing disorder. Oftentimes, I'm actually the first person to catch that. I've even caught that before that, a family's audiologist did not catch because they didn't have an audiologist who specialized in
Mm.
that. And we were able to catch that a few times. So there's so
So
many different.
we do, let me just interrupt for 1 second because I
Yes.
do have an entire podcast on auditory processing with Jody Jedlicka, and I will make sure
Oh,
that that
so
one
good.
is right. Make sure that that one is linked in the show notes. But I do want to because I know there's actually more that you're going to say,
Yes,
but let's
indeed.
back
But
up just to that piece for a second,
yes,
because to be able to take in language,
yes.
auditorily, right? And then be able to comprehend and then get it back out, that seems very complex. So tell me a little bit more about what that means and what families would be looking for, since that is so hard
Oh,
to
yeah.
get
Yeah, yeah.
diagnosed.
Yeah, I think this is a really important thing because so many times I get told, my kid can understand if they pay attention, or I think they just don't want to
Mm,
listen, or things like that. And auditory processing disorder, as well as language disorders, can masquerade as bad behavior a lot of the times because kids don't want to be dumb more than they don't want to be anything else.
right.
They would
Mhm.
rather be badly behaved than they would be dumb. And you don't ever have to say, my kid's dumb, for them to believe it about themselves because they genuinely don't understand what you're saying. And so I have seen so many children break down at different points, and then it looks like bad behavior. But let me tell you a little bit about how it can break down. So even if a body can technically hear, and the ear gets good signal,
Mhm.
when it's sent through the auditory nerves, to the part of the brain that process the sound, you can have breakdowns at the point of the auditory nerve. You can have
Okay.
breakdowns, in the part of the brain that processes the sound. Sometimes the kids that I work with that have, differences in their speech sounds, they don't talk clearly. Sometimes it's in the mouth, but sometimes it's in how the brain perceives the acoustic profile of the sounds. And not to get too nerdy, but the acoustic profile of sounds is way complicated.
Yeah.
And certain sounds sound like others. And so many times kids can when they're organizing the library of their brain, they can put sounds in the wrong spots or pick a favorite sound. This is one of my favorites to work with. They pick a favorite sound like the D sound because it's super easy peasy, right?
Yeah.
They put it in every single shelf. And so whenever they're pulling out, oh, I want to say cat, instead they say dad. Why do they say
Okay.
that? It's not because they're being lazy or they're not paying attention. It may be because the part of their brain that sorts the sound files or even discriminates and tells how they're different or not, depending on whether or not they're able to, something's breaking down there. And that's incredibly important with how they learn vocabulary.
Yeah.
A whole different part of the brain. Some kids have difficulty storing information into that part of the brain. Like I have this one child that I'm working with who is really brilliant. She's going to be an authoress. She's going to write books. It's going to be fabulous. But right now she's really struggling with dyslexia because her brain does not discriminate sounds very well at all from an auditory standpoint. So she hears it
Yeah.
and there's a bit of an issue there. But then on top of that, her brain doesn't you know compartmentalize and organize those well, and then
That
when she
is,
puts into vocabulary, that's a
yeah.
whole different difficulty.
That is fascinating. And what's really interesting, like even my own brain
Yeah.
right now is spinning because thinking back to my son that I mentioned when we had him in speech therapy back in 2020, and me just saying the R's. So he was 4 at that point, and us working through it was not even how my mouth was moving was not really
Yes.
helping him to make much progress. It wasn't until we really worked on reading and seeing the letter
Yes.
and making
Yes.
the sound that it matters. So do you think,
Yep.
wow, I'm so like this,
Yes.
it all makes
So
sense
so
now.
so many times moms ask me or they tell me, "Oh, my kid's 8, but because their sounds aren't ready, we didn't think it would be right to teach them how to read." And I was like, "Oh, no, 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 no. You
Yeah.
need to give it a try because some kids need that visual because it helps them go, "Wait a minute, that's different."
Yeah, that's,
Because
I think,
most parents don't know that brain can break down in that way, that the kids legitimately can totally hear the word cat
mhm.
and can hear it as a whole thing, just like a dog would. Phonological awareness, they hear all the pieces, whatever, but they don't really hear the individual pieces quite the same way. And their brain doesn't they hear it, but they don't discriminate the difference, they don't categorize it differently, and that can be a make or break difference. And so for some kids the visual is a gift. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And when you combine that with differences in memory or a child who has a breakdown in syntax or the way their brain processes the order of language, kids who are saying him was the one who he had the orange at my house on the other day that was not today. Those like gobbledygook, like you're like,
Yeah.
what did you just
I know.
say? I
I was
have
like,
no
wait, I need to
idea.
follow this.
How is word salad? I am so lost. Those
Yeah.
kids, like they have ideas, but they're
Mhm.
part of their brain that goes, all right, everybody, we got to organize this thought. Yeah, there's so many different places where things can break down in the sound system, in the language system, and it's not common knowledge. It certainly is not in the what to expect when you're expecting book.
Right. So this also kind of pulls together so much for me as an occupational therapist when I think through sensory systems about how we rely on all of our systems together, right? So for my son with his speech there, the auditory piece, he was probably not within the hardware part, not within his ears or even probably the nerve, but going into the software of his brain of that organization of the
Yes.
sound.
Yes.
So then it took the additional sense, so the visual sense, to really help him to pull that all together. So many times we talk about multisensory curriculums and multisensory activities. And so that really feeds over even to our kids' language as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So there's actually some really cool tie-ins if you want me to nerd out here for just a
I
split
do.
second. Kids who do not eat solids are not as likely to have language. Kids who do not play with two different kinds of toys together are not as likely to put two words together and
Okay.
create phrases. It is important, the play and all the sensory aspects connected with that, our perception of reality, etc., and for the sensations of eating solid foods
Yeah.
with texture, not just puree. and it promotes not just speech sound development, which I guess could make more sense, but it also promotes language development. And I think that's so cool.
That
Like I have a
is,
little one that I'm working with right now with Down syndrome, and she is making a jump from being syringe fed all of her liquids to having a cup. And she is chatting up a storm and not just making more sounds, but she is communicating for more purposes. She's saying her version of no for the first time in like 5 years. And we are
wow.
stoked. But
Yeah.
I think what it is, a lot of it is the changes in what she's sensorily experienced.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so not just the
absolutely.
shape of her mouth to drink from a
Mhm.
cup, but
Yeah.
instead, like that she's holding it, she's seeing something different. She can
Mhm.
probably perceive the liquid in the cup versus even if it's maybe was colored within the syringe, wasn't
Mhm.
necessarily able to really see, okay, so that's something that isn't solid that's going into my mouth and,
Mhm.
being
And
able
it's
to
a
put together all
multi-step
those pieces.
process. And it's a
Hmm.
multi-step process. And I'm sure as an OT, you love the executive functioning of
I
that.
do. I do.
Yeah.
Very much so. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about this language because you did mention how language and dyslexia, and, we've talked a little bit about the reading piece. So, how all of this comes together. Because this is where, in the homeschool world, I think where people were either jumping at the speech sounds, which I totally get
Oh yeah,
because you
totally.
can very easily see that or hear that, obviously and recognize, I don't know how to work with that. But a lot of times when it comes down to reading and writing, we don't necessarily know when it is time to get some help.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, can you tell me kind of how they're related and what parents would be looking for to recognize, okay, is this a speech therapy issue or a speech issue where we should go and get some help from a speech pathologist?
Gotcha. Gotcha. All right. So very simply, if you're not getting leaps and bounds progress by doing reading tutoring,
Hmm.
if you're one of the few kids that has, and hopefully I can say this, who has failed something like Barton or OG, that is beautifully organized, that is very scientific reading, has
Yeah.
all sorts of really cool things about it. And your kid is just still really hitting a wall, and you have a great person, that is a sign that maybe there's something, like you said, with the hardware, with the software that needs addressed. And I personally love working with a family that has a good Barton person, that
Hmm.
has a good OG person, that has a good whatever, tool they happen to use, approach, a great curriculum, because I like working on the brain so that moms and their team can hit the ground running with the other reading supports. I like to do the underlying stuff. And the places where I see any tutoring type based system, no matter how good it is, fail,
Hmm.
not because it's not good, but because it doesn't have those components and I don't kids, though I would argue that more kids need this than we might assume
Yeah.
in the homeschool circles, even though homeschoolers have amazing language enrichment just straight out the gate. I get so many less late talkers in homeschool circles than I get other circles because things are wonderful. Things are enriched. Usually, if they're a late talker, there is something more significant going on and they
Hmm.
need. But I would say that is a difference in memory. It is a difference in attention. It is a difference in some cognitive linguistic skill, and oftentimes a expressive or receptive language disorder that's kind of underneath it. It is a difficulty in visualization. It is a difficulty in being able to retain information for long enough to process it, a difference in how the brain understands and uses language at some level, or sounds, like in the case
Okay.
of one of the most common types of dyslexia is phonological dyslexia. It's that difference in how your brain sorts all
Hmm.
of that beautiful sound information.
Okay, I feel like this is a great time to take a break. And when we come back, I think I'm going to ask you to define some of those terms that you just threw.
Okay.
Like parents are like, huh?
I know. I get so stinking technical, but I promise I'm not fancy.
You guys, learning to read is not just about letters and sounds. From an occupational therapy lens, it also involves attention, motor coordination, visual processing, sensory regulation, and language working together. See, it's not a simple task. So, we also need the right tools to help us to support our kids. The Love Every Reading skill set supports the whole child through hands-on materials that encourage fine motor development for writing readiness, visual discrimination for recognizing patterns and symbols, language-rich interactions that support comprehension. The activities are designed to be interactive and meaningful, helping children actively engage their bodies and brains in the learning process. And parents are guided through what to offer and when, because goodness gracious, we do not need to be more overwhelmed. This helps us because we don't need to design or piece together instruction on our own, but we have the right tools to support our kids. So explore the reading skill set at loveevery.com. Now, back to the show. Welcome back. So Amanda was just telling us so much information and it's all really valuable, but I want to break it down just a tad bit more. So the first thing that you said, actually you said a lot, but the first one that really caught my mind is when you were talking about language processing. So I think we did mention, the difference in, the hardware and the software, right? So we were talking about the mouth and then, some about the actual brain. But when you're saying the word processing, what do you mean by that?
So it depends on the process that's being done, what parts of the brain are being used, and what's being required of them. And there's actually some folks like one of my favorites, David Kilpatrick, Dr. David Kilpatrick. He's a reading specialist, psychologist by nature and training, but he talks about how there's not really technically phonological processing, but instead it's your working memory. So your ability to remember something long enough to use it and how it is used by the sound system. And so in the sound system, my thought is your processing is your ability to not only discriminate the differences between the sounds acoustically, but your ability to retain that information while doing something with it, like hearing the word or decoding it and blending it. So when you have the word cat, you have k, at, and you got to remember those in order for as long as it takes for you to blend them together. And to me, that's phonological processing, even though it's not a technical term. Sounds technical, but it's not like on the official list of technical terms. But then language processing. When I think about central auditory processing disorder, I think about kids who they hear all the words, they totally hear them correctly. And when it gets into their language system, it's like when you bring a whole bunch of clean laundry into a room, and instead of neatly putting it away in the drawers, you just kind of throw it everywhere and just see where it lands. And then you expect yourself to pick out an outfit or to have a clean room after that. And you just can't.
Nope.
And some kids don't have the process of how do I read the order of what was just said, remember it long enough to do something with it. And if they also have a language disorder on top of it, they don't know the difference between would you get your socks on after your shoes or would you get your socks on for your shoes or whatever. They can know the meaning of before and after, but suddenly when you put it into phrase, things get hazy. Those small words get lost with kids with central auditory processing disorder and kids with language disorders. And so that would be how I think of language processing.
This is fascinating to me because it's almost like when I'm talking about handwriting with families, and we've done several podcasts on this as well, all of those underlying skills that are involved, like we need to think about our strength in addition. And here in this point, you're like, we need to think about the mouth, right? And how much it can move, or the actual ear canals, we need to be able to think about these two systems. Then I talk about like the motor control of your hands, and you're saying the motor control of, your tongue to be able to get these sounds out. And then I think about, can you process, what you want to say? Can you come up with your idea and then get it on the paper? Okay, and so what you're saying here is, can you process the idea that you're hearing and then come to all the way to the frontal lobe to get our working memory to then come back to engage with the mouth? So communication is so much more complex, I think, even than I was realizing, and I work in this field.
Yes. There's so many crisscrosses across the brain. And it's so interesting how many different places can go funky. And then you have
Mm-hmm.
to untangle it. And it's really hard to untangle that on your own. And I mean, I'm a homeschool grad. We homeschool our kids. I have so much love for homeschooling. And I think there's so much that we can do on our own, which is why I like equipping parents far more than I like being like, okay, you need to go out and get help. No, you
Right.
get somebody who wants to work with you and teach you because you're going to do far more good than I would with your child. But you need a buddy too sometimes. And I think that's
Yes.
because unless you want to really study the brain, and be an expert on your child, which that
Mhm.
is its own full-time job. Sometimes it's nice to have help.
Yeah. I say this all the time. Like homeschooling is not alone schooling. It is where we
No.
get the privilege of building our team because we are the experts in our children and we need to oftentimes to find somebody to come alongside of us to help out in the areas where we need it, and this can very well be one, especially when you're talking about how this language affects your reading, how it affects we just talked some about how it affects your writing. I mean, how it's going to affect your comprehension of math because there's so much language involved in explaining how to do a math concept. Like it
Yeah.
all comes together.
Yeah. Did you know that kids with language disorders are much more likely to have time blindness and difficulty with mental math related to time?
I did not, but tell
Yep.
me more about that. Why?
Yes. Well, okay. So it's interesting. I think it has to do with the types of understanding with how the world works. And I think it's
Okay.
interrelated with syntax and concepts that are very what's called cognitive linguistic. So, like thinking language based.
Okay.
When we think, we human beings, we think in language. We may think in pictures too, but we also think in language. And concepts like before,
Mhm.
after, alongside, like
Right.
all this.
Above, beyond, like all the
Yeah,
prepositions. Yeah.
yeah, a quarter to, like
Right. Okay.
half hour past. Like they're
Yeah.
all very languagey, aren't they? And
Hmm.
word problems are a whole nother business. If
Hmm.
you have a kid who does amazing with calculation and just sinks when they do word problems, consider that you might have a very high level language difference. Even if they communicate well, you can have amazing conversational skills and still have the remnants of a language issue. You really can.
Fascinating. So then how do parents know? Because this is one of the, I want to say, downfalls. As much as I love homeschooling, and I'm with you, obviously we homeschool our own kids, it can be hard when we are used to how our children do, how they
Oh,
are
yeah.
doing within their math
Yeah.
and how we often accommodate them very well.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily see the other, Johnny, who is also the same age as our kiddo, who is doing to compare, not to compare to be like, man, you're better and I'm behind, but instead to
Yeah.
compare and be like, wait a minute, why are you struggling? And a
Hmm.
lot of times they can find that faster when we have more professionals, like in a school system, looking. But when we don't, and we are the parents, how do we know what to look for and when to seek that help?
Yeah. That's a really good question. So, if you have multiple kids, if one kid is just having a harder time than all your other kids, that's enough of an indicator. If your mama gut is just twinging and you're like, man, this is so frustrating, this is causing tears. Is my normally sweet and wonderful child suddenly being willful?
Right.
Maybe it's genuinely hard, right? And a language disorder for some kids can be, how you've heard the term hidden disability. It can be
Hmm.
something that it's not obvious. And you can have a bright spark, a kid who is so bright in certain aspects, who just for some reason is different with that. And a lot of times, as homeschoolers, we're so good at, like you said, beautifully accommodating
Yeah.
that we don't experience friction because we're always giving our kid exactly what they need to do their next step. But if you have any questions, any doubts whatsoever, if you're not humming along at the pace that you would expect for them based on their other intelligences, then why not ask for a screening?
Yeah.
I know that I am not the only speech language pathologist that offers screenings. I
Hmm.
offer mine very inexpensively because I want people to know whether or not something's up. And a lot of SLPs offer free consultations. It doesn't hurt to ask because honestly, most of the time when a parent has this question in their head, they're almost always right. Probably because you know your child so well.
Yeah, right. So, what kind of questions would you ask or would you expect a parent to ask you when they are deciding whether to come to speech therapy?
I usually find that parents ask me, is this something that you can help with? Because they
Hmm.
already know that there's a problem, but they don't know if I'm the kind of person that can help with that. So
Right.
that's a question. Don't feel ashamed asking that.
Hmm.
Ask them any question that you can write down. If they get offended, they're not the right speech language pathologist for you.
Boom. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. But if you can ask them those questions, you're probably going to get a good answer. So don't be afraid of asking questions, I think is the moral of that little story.
Hmm.
But I think one of the things that I get asked the most is not even a question. A family will say, okay, so when my kid does this, this happens. Is that normal? You can
Oh,
always
yeah.
Google that. You can
Hmm.
totally Google that. Or you can email an SLP. I, for instance, answer that question all the time in my community. But one of the questions that I usually follow up with is, what are you doing currently to help? And the thing that parents don't realize until I ask that question is how much they're compensating for their kid, how much
Yeah.
they're doing for their child or providing supports for their child without even thinking about it. And I don't want you to feel bad about that because that's the homeschool parent's superpower,
Yeah.
among many of them that we have in our repertoire, right? But while it's a gift in one sense, if we want them to fill in those gaps instead of just compensating for them, if they truly want to improve the way their brain does their processes, then they need to watch their kid fail a little bit
Hmm. Hmm.
and then ask themselves, okay, does that feel normal to me? That
I think
that
that
can
is,
be a good indicator.
oh, so good because, and I do have an entire podcast. It's called The Accepting and the Expecting, that really
Oh yeah.
actually talks about the science behind making a mistake and how we need to do that to encourage learning. Like when we as parents are compensating, and you're right that most of the time we just do what we don't even know, but we're compensating and accommodating for our kids in a way that then they're not having to challenge their brain. And sometimes it
Mhm.
even takes the outside person to allow that challenge because it's not always
Yes.
easy as a parent. You're like,
Yes. Yes.
oh.
One of the biggest gifts I believe that you can give your child is the ability to fail and try again, the ability to fail and not let it crush you.
Yes.
That's so big. And I don't know how many times I've worked with a child who's never been given the opportunity to fail.
Yeah.
And when a parent, especially when they figure out, oh my goodness, my child has had a speech or language disorder all this time, I feel so guilty. Why didn't I get help sooner or whatever? Because that is something that comes up all the time. Because in homeschool families, we wait a little longer.
Yeah.
When they have that moment that they look back and I can be like, but now you have the opportunity. And now you are giving them a huge gift because now you're giving them the opportunity to grow and
Yeah.
to be independent. That's your chief job, right? Is to
Hmm.
make them independent and to fail and retain a certain level of constructiveness
Yep.
about it. Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I love that.
Amanda, this has been so fantastic. And I know we could keep talking about this for hours, especially that topic, because building
Yeah.
resilience within our children
Oh,
and helping them to see all of the different areas where that is helping their brain to grow, right? I
yes,
mean, we've talked
yes,
about how interconnected the brain is with language and with the mouth and all of it all put together,
yes,
how that failure then helps all of those pieces, you know?
yes,
Oh, goodness.
yes.
Can you tell people where to find you and some of the ways that you do support the homeschool community as a whole?
Okay. All right. You can find me at www.illuminatecommunicate.com because I wanted to make it really hard for people to find me. I've had to spell that for so many people, but it's
Yeah.
hate.com. Although if you search for me and Illuminate, oftentimes you'll find me, and I'm sure that I'll be somewhere in the show notes. But I have a community. I serve 3 states with direct speech therapy and weekly video coaching. But in my community, which is a resource that is very easily accessible. I answer questions. I do little trainings. I have courses that I have written for speech, language, and you name it. And I have 3 very easy to get started with 3-day challenges for parents: the Talk Clearly Challenge, the More Words and Cozy Conversations Challenge, and the Reading Ready Brain Challenge. And in 3 days, you should know what to start with your child. And then if you take the challenge and you continue it for a week or so, you will get to take a look back at your progress that you've made. And all my tools that I make these days, 5 minutes a day. That's all I'm asking for mamas,
Wow.
because
Yeah.
you're busy, but 5
Hmm.
minutes a day. So
Wow. That's so fantastic. And I will say, we did use that, our curriculum. I don't know if
yes,
that
you
was
did.
still in there, but
Yeah.
it is,
Oh, it is. Yes,
it's
it is
in
actually
that.
finished in
Yeah.
all its huge glory. The Art
Yeah.
Clarity Roadmap. It is
Hmm.
giant. So
Well,
that's the only
I,
non-5 minute one. The practice is inside her 5 minutes.
yeah, maybe I should have my son come in here and be like, hello, I can say my R's now. I
Yes.
read and write
Yes,
just to
exactly.
prove how
Exactly.
great it is. Well, thank
Yeah.
you again so much for being here. This is a wonderful conversation.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of The OT is In, and a huge thank you again to Love Every for sponsoring today's episode. I'm always grateful to partner with companies that truly value child development, curiosity, connection, and learning through meaningful everyday experiences. If today's conversation encouraged you, helped you connect some dots, or reminded you that you don't have to figure out all of this alone, 1, I'd love it if you leave a review. And 2, I want to invite you to join the waitlist for the OT is In Insiders. This is brand new and actually won't even launch until August, which is why there's a waitlist right now. It's the next step for parents who want ongoing support, practical strategies, encouragement, and community from someone who understands both occupational therapy and the homeschool life. It's designed to be a place where homeschool parents can continue learning, ask questions, and feel less isolated while supporting their unique learners. Once a month, I'm going to give a very short presentation that's going to dive deeper into these podcast topics, and then we're going to talk about it. I'm going to open the floor to you, the parents, to be able to ask questions, and then we as a community are going to be able to answer. This is not going to be another membership where you have so much information that bogs you down and frankly scares you. Instead, it's going to be a, hey, this is what's going on right now. This is how this podcast relates to it. Can you help me out? Yeah, I can, and I'm in. So you can join the waitlist through the link in the show notes, and I cannot wait to share more with you soon. I'm Sarah Collins, occupational therapist and homeschool mom. So thanks for listening and recognizing that you are not doing this alone, because the OT is always in.